A dark cloud of living metal descends from the sky. These are not ordinary birds. They are the Stymphalian birds, and they are about to face the one man in all of Greece strong enough to stop them. Hercules, the legendary hero, stands ready for his sixth labor, a task so strange it defies all expectation. By the end of this story, you will uncover the brilliant, unconventional strategy that turned an impossible monster hunt into a legendary victory. We will explore why these creatures were more terrifying than any beast he had faced before, and reveal the shocking divine secret that made their defeat possible. What do you believe is the true price of heroism? Hercules was not a free man on a glorious quest. He was bound in servitude, a punishment that twisted his great strength into a tool for another. His master was no mighty warrior king, but his own cousin, the cowardly and spiteful Eurystheus. The very idea of this relationship is a paradox. How could Greece's greatest hero be forced to take orders from a man who hid in a bronze jar at the first sign of danger? The answer lies in a tragic crime, a moment of divine madness inflicted by the goddess Hera, who held a bitter grudge against Hercules from his birth. In a fit of this insanity, a curse sent from the heavens, Hercules committed an unspeakable act, murdering his own wife and children. When the fog of madness lifted, he was left with only grief and horror. Seeking purification for his sin, he traveled to the oracle of Delphi, who told him his path to atonement was not through quiet prayer, but through brutal, unending labor. He was to place himself in the service of Eurystheus for 12 years and perform any task the king demanded. These were the famous 12 labors, a punishment designed by the gods to be a series of impossible trials. Each one was a death sentence in disguise, pushing the hero to his absolute physical, mental, and moral limits. King Eurystheus, fearful of his cousin's power and eager to see him fail, chose each labor not for the good of the people, but to break the spirit of the man he envied. So when the king pointed a trembling finger towards the monstrous birds of Stymphalius, it was not a call to restore peace. It was another calculated move in a divine game of cruelty, sending a broken man to face an invincible enemy. The destination for this labor was a place of profound dread. Hercules journeyed to the dark, swampy waters of Lake Stymphalia in the heart of Arcadia. This was no idyllic Greek landscape. Once a beautiful and fertile region, the land was now a suffocating marshland, poisoned by the presence of the monstrous birds. The very air hung thick with menace, heavy with the stench of decay and the constant, unsettling rustle of metallic feathers. The water itself was a murky soup, choked with reeds and shadows, hiding unknown terrors beneath its stagnant surface. For the local people, this was not a home but a prison of fear. They lived in constant terror, unable to farm the ruined land or fish the toxic waters, their lives dictated by the shadow of the flock that blotted out the sun. The beauty of Arcadia had been inverted, transformed into a treacherous bog where every step could be your last, and the only sound was the chilling chorus of creatures that were neither fully bird nor fully beast. This was the stage for Hercules' sixth labor, a poisoned peace where nature itself had turned against humanity. These creatures were a walking contradiction of nature. The Stymphalian birds were not born from any natural egg. They were horrors forged in the darkest corners of mythology, a flock of living weapons. Their feathers were not soft plumes but plates of hardened bronze, each one sharpened to a lethal point. When they beat their wings, the sound was not a gentle flutter but the harsh, grating clamor of 1,000 swords being drawn at once. Their beaks were not made of keratin but of sharpened brass, strong enough to punch through a soldier's bronze breastplate as if it were parchment. And their talons, equally metallic, could tear a man apart with terrifying ease. But perhaps their most fearsome weapon was their strange, unnatural ammunition. They could launch their own feathers like arrows, firing a volley of metallic projectiles from the sky that could shred a man to pieces from a distance. This made them untouchable, turning the very air around them into a killing zone. Their cruelty was matched only by their hunger, for their diet included human flesh. They were ruthless predators who saw the people of Arcadia not as threats but as prey. They did not just attack to defend their territory. They hunted for the savage pleasure of it, turning a once peaceful lakeside into their personal larder. How could any hero, even one as strong as Hercules, hope to fight an enemy that controlled the skies and rained death from above? Their origins were as foul as the swamp they inhabited. Where did such monsters come from? Some ancient whispers claim they were sacred to Ares, the bloodthirsty god of war himself. These were not his beloved children, but his favored weapons, living embodiments of the carnage and metallic terror he sowed upon battlefields. A god of conflict would have little use for gentle doves. He would create creatures whose very flight was the sound of clashing armies, whose existence was a permanent siege. Other, darker tales suggest they were not born at all, but simply spawned from the swamp's own putrid heart, crawling from the deepest, most poisoned mud as if the land itself had grown a sickness with wings and a taste for flesh. This second theory adds a truly grotesque layer to their menace. Their dung was said to be so toxic it could blight an entire field in a single night. A single dropping could wither a healthy olive tree to a blackened stump. This was not mere pestilence. It was a creeping, biological warfare that poisoned the very earth, ensuring nothing could grow and no one could live near their domain. The horror of the Stymphalian birds was not just in their immediate violence. It was in the lingering, environmental death they left behind, a wasteland that served as a permanent monument to their foulness. How do you fight an enemy that turns the world to poison with its mere presence? Hercules stood at the edge of the marsh and faced a tactical nightmare. A direct assault was pure suicide. To even reach the birds, he would have to wade through a sucking, knee-deep bog where every step was a struggle and solid footing was a memory. The moment he disturbed the water, the entire flock would take to the air in a deafening, metallic storm. Think of the problem not as fighting one monster, but as confronting a living, flying army. A single warrior, no matter how strong, cannot stand against 10,000 archers perched on invisible walls in the sky. His legendary club and bow were almost useless here. Swinging his club at the air would accomplish nothing, and loosing a single arrow into that swirling cloud would be like throwing a pebble into a hurricane. He might kill one or two, but the rest would simply shower him with a hail of their own razor-sharp feathers. This was not a test of brute strength, but of pure, unadulterated wit. How do you solve a puzzle where the pieces can fly, shoot back, and are counted in the thousands? The true enemy was not the bronze, but the overwhelming numbers and the absolute advantage of the air. Eurystheus had, perhaps unintentionally, crafted the perfect trap, one where muscle was meaningless and only a miracle of strategy could win the day. Trapped at the water's edge, the hero's legendary strength was a worthless currency. He could not punch the sky. He could not strangle the wind. For the first time in his labors, brute force offered no path forward, only a quick and bloody end. In that moment of absolute desperation, a profound shift occurred within Hercules. This was not the rage of a warrior, but the humble plea of a man who had run out of options. He fell to his knees in the muck, not in defeat but in supplication, and he prayed. He did not call upon his father Zeus for thunderbolts. He did not beg Ares for a god's fury. Instead, he called upon Athena, the brilliant goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. He asked not for power but for a plan. He sought not an army but an idea. And Athena, ever practical and favoring clever heroes, answered. She did not arrive with a legion of celestial soldiers. There was no blast of divine light or roar of cosmic power. She simply appeared, a figure of calm intellect amidst the swamp's chaos, and in her hands she held a most unexpected gift. It was not a sword or a shield. It was a pair of enormous bronze clappers, a giant rattle known as a crotala. This was her solution, a tool so simple it seemed almost absurd, yet within its simplicity lay a devastating genius. The goddess of wisdom understood that to defeat an enemy of impossible numbers, you do not fight them one by one. You turn their greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. This was not a weapon built for killing. The crotala, forged by the divine blacksmith Hephaestus in the fires of his volcanic workshop, were instruments of pure, concentrated terror. Imagine two massive bronze discs, each larger than a warrior's shield, connected by a sturdy leather strap. They were not edged or pointed. Their power did not lie in their ability to cut or crush, but in their potential for sound. In the hands of a mortal, they would have been impossibly heavy, clumsy noisemakers, but in the grip of Hercules, a demigod whose strength could channel the will of a goddess, they became something else entirely. Athena's brilliant strategy bypassed the physical threat of the birds completely. She understood that their true vulnerability was not their bronze feathers, but their heightened, unnatural senses. These creatures lived in a near-silent swamp, their world defined by the soft lapping of water and the rustle of reeds. Their hearing was likely as sharp and metallic as their beaks, tuned to the slightest sound of prey. The plan was to overwhelm that sensitivity, to attack their minds instead of their bodies. Hercules would not fight the flock. He would use their own numbers and their own nature against them, turning the sky itself into a weapon. The hero raised the clappers high above his head, and with a surge of his immense power, he brought them together. The sound that erupted was not merely loud. It was a physical force, a shattering wave of noise that ripped through the stagnant air of the marsh. It was the scream of a mountain being torn in two, the roar of 1,000 thunderstorms concentrated into a single, deafening instant. It was a cacophony so utterly alien and painful that it scraped against the very soul. For the first time since their arrival, the Stymphalian birds knew fear. The resulting shockwave of sound was absolute. Hercules stood upon a rocky outcrop overlooking the marsh, the divine crotala gripped in his hands, and he brought them together again and again. Each clash was a fresh cataclysm, a percussive blast that hammered across the lake's surface, shaking the reeds and churning the stagnant water. The noise was not just heard, it was felt, a brutal vibration in the chest and a sharp pain in the ears. For the Stymphalian birds, creatures of an unnaturally silent and metallic world, this was a form of torture their bronze bodies could not withstand. Their razor-sharp senses, so perfectly tuned for hunting, were now their greatest liability. The deafening roar did not just startle them, it invaded them, scrambling their instincts and shattering their coordinated malevolence. The sky, once their domain of ordered terror, became a vortex of chaos. The flock erupted from the trees in a single, panicked mass, a swirling cloud of living metal caught in a frenzy. They were not attacking, they were fleeing the noise itself, crashing into one another, their metallic feathers scraping and shrieking as they collided. Their cruel, calculated hunting patterns dissolved into blind, terrified flight. The very weapon Athena provided had turned the birds' own heightened awareness against them, transforming an invincible army into a confused and chaotic mob. How do you defeat a monster? Sometimes you do not need a sword. You simply need to make a noise so terrible that the monster defeats itself. The sky itself turned against him. A colossal, swirling vortex of living metal erupted from the marsh, the sun glinting off 1,000,000 bronze feathers like a storm of daggers. The sheer force of their wings created a gale that tore at the reeds and whipped the water into a frenzy. For a single, horrifying moment, the chaotic flock seemed to move as one, their primal instincts overriding their panic. They oriented on the source of the deafening noise, the lone figure standing on the rock. In a single, synchronized motion, they tilted their bodies. The air itself became their weapon. A volley of their razor-sharp feathers rained down, a hissing cloud of projectiles aimed directly at Hercules. It was not a calculated attack, but a terrified, reflexive barrage, a final desperate attempt to obliterate the terrifying sound that had shattered their world. The hero was faced with an impossible choice: to stand his ground and be shredded, or to abandon the one tool that could save him. But the lion's hide was his shield. As the deadly feathers hissed through the air, they did not find soft flesh. They glanced harmlessly off the legendary pelt of the Nemean lion, a cloak that was impervious to any weapon. The barrage was terrifying, a kinetic storm of metal, yet it left the hero unscathed. He stood firm, a rock against the tempest, the divine clappers still roaring in his grasp. This was the critical turning point. Hercules saw the birds were not just panicked, but trapped by their own instincts. The deafening noise from the crotala had herded them, forcing the entire scattered flock into a dense, swirling mass directly above the lake. They were no longer a cloud of individual hunters, but a single, chaotic, and enormous target. In that moment, the noisemaker had done its job. It was time for the archer to take his shot. With practiced speed, he set down the clappers and swung his legendary bow from his shoulder. This was not a weapon for a frontal assault, but a tool for a surgical strike. He knocked an arrow, its tip dipped in the venomous blood of the Lernaean hydra, a poison so potent it could kill with the slightest scratch. He did not aim at the flock. He aimed at individual birds within the swirling vortex. One by one, he drew and loosed. Each arrow found its mark with unerring accuracy, a single point of lethal contact in the chaotic sky. A bird would shriek, its flight faltering, and then it would tumble from the heavens, a splash of bronze vanishing into the dark waters below. He was a predator now, exploiting the chaos he had created, turning their clustered formation from a defensive maneuver into a death sentence. He was not fighting 1,000 battles at once. He was fighting one battle 1,000 times and winning every single one. The chaos in the sky began to thin. The relentless cacophony and the deadly rain of arrows had broken the spirit of the monstrous flock. For every bird that fell, pierced by a hydra venom-tipped arrow, a dozen more were gripped by a primal, overwhelming terror. The sanctuary of their swamp had become a killing ground, and the source of the world's shattering noise still stood firm, unharmed and unyielding. Their will to fight was gone, replaced by a single, instinctual drive to flee. As one, the remaining Stymphalian birds turned from the lake, their bronze wings beating a frantic, discordant rhythm against the air. They rose higher and higher, a shrinking cloud of metallic terror, and then they streamed away from Arcadia, never to return. This was not a retreat. It was a great exodus, a permanent abandonment of their poisoned home. Legends say this scattered flock flew across the entire Greek world, a terrifying spectacle for any who witnessed their passage. Some tales claim they found a new, desolate refuge on the island of Ares in the distant Black Sea, a place as harsh and warlike as their nature. There, under the gaze of their bloodthirsty patron god, they were said to have lived out their days, forever separated from the lands they had once terrorized. The skies over Lake Stymphalia were finally, blessedly clear. The oppressive silence was broken not by the clang of metallic feathers, but by the tentative songs of ordinary birds returning to a land reborn. The people of Arcadia could emerge from their homes, feeling the sun on their faces without fear, and watch as the waters slowly began to cleanse themselves of the lingering poison. Hercules had not just slain monsters, he had liberated an entire region, restoring a balance that had been twisted into nightmare. His victory proved that true heroism is not always about overpowering an enemy with greater force, but about understanding its nature so completely that you can defeat it with a single, brilliant idea. Life returned to the marsh in a slow, quiet miracle. The terrifying chorus of metallic shrieks was replaced by the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the tentative chirps of sparrows returning to the reeds. Without the constant poison of the birds' presence, the swamp itself began to heal. The foul, stagnant water, once choked with toxic dung, started to flow, cleansing itself as it mingled with fresh streams from the surrounding hills. The oppressive stench of decay faded, replaced by the clean, wet scent of earth after a long-awaited rain. The very air felt lighter, the perpetual shadow of fear lifting with the morning sun. For the first time in years, the people of Arcadia could draw a deep, unburdened breath. They emerged from their homes, their faces turned to the sky, not in terror but in wonder. They saw the clear blue expanse and knew the nightmare was truly over. This was the real victory, the profound consequence of Hercules' cleverness. The land itself was breathing a sigh of relief, a living testament to the hero's success. Farmers who had watched their fields wither and die could now return to the rich, black soil. They plowed the earth that was no longer blighted, sowing seeds that would actually sprout into healthy crops. Fishermen could once again cast their nets into the lake, pulling them up full of fish instead of the bones of the birds' victims. Children played at the water's edge, their laughter echoing across the landscape that had been silent for so long. The restoration of Arcadia was not an instant event, but a gradual, beautiful process of life reclaiming its rightful place. This labor was never just a monster hunt. It was an act of ecological and social salvation. Hercules had not merely defeated a terrifying enemy, he had mended a broken piece of the world. He returned safety and normalcy to the lives of ordinary people who had been living under a siege of feathers and fear. His greatest strength in this trial was not the power in his arms, but the wisdom to understand that a hero's true purpose is to create a space where simple, peaceful life can flourish once more. The marsh was healing, but the hero's journey was far from over. With the skies of Arcadia finally clear, Hercules turned his back on the restored peace and began the long trek back to Terrens. He carried with him no trophy, no bronze feather or monstrous beak. His proof of victory was the simple, profound silence he left behind. Yet as he drew closer to the fortified city, the weight of his servitude settled upon him once more. He was not returning in triumph to a grateful people, but in submission to a master who dreaded his success. The contrast could not have been starker. The man who had stared down a storm of living metal now walking back into the gilded cage of his cousin's fear. King Eurystheus, upon hearing the first report that his cousin was approaching the city gates, felt a familiar, cold dread grip his heart. The Stymphalian birds were gone. The news was unbelievable, a tale of clanging noises and a cleansed swamp that sounded more like a bizarre dream than a labor. That Hercules had triumphed against such an impossible, otherworldly threat did not fill the king with relief for his kingdom's safety. It filled him with a corrosive envy and a terror that the hero's power was growing beyond any hope of control. His response was as predictable as it was pathetic. Before Hercules could even step into the throne room, the king had already scrambled from his seat, his royal robes flapping around him in his panic. He fled to the deepest, most secure chamber of his palace, where his massive bronze storage jar stood waiting. The heavy lid clanged shut, sealing him in a self-imposed prison of his own cowardice. From within that hollow, metallic echo chamber, his muffled, trembling voice would issue his next commands. He could not bear to look upon the man he had sent to die, the hero who had instead returned alive, having solved a problem of monsters and madness with nothing but cleverness and a loud noise. This was the true price of Hercules' heroism, a victory celebrated not with laurels, but with the sound of a coward king hiding in a pot. The true terror of the Stymphalian birds may lie not in their bronze feathers, but in what they represent. These creatures are more than monsters, they are powerful symbols of the overwhelming forces that can besiege human life. One of the most potent interpretations paints them as a manifestation of pestilence. Their toxic dung that blighted the land, their infestation of a fertile region, and their role in spreading disease and famine perfectly mirror the way a plague can descend upon a community, seemingly unstoppable and indifferent to human suffering. They were a literal swarm of death, corrupting everything they touched. Another layer connects them directly to their divine patron, Ares, the god of war. Their feathers were like arrows, their beaks like spears, and the sound of their wings was the horrifying clamor of a battlefield. They did not just represent conflict, They were the very essence of war's destructive chaos, a force that descends from above to ravage the land and its people, leaving only a poisoned wasteland in its wake. But perhaps the most relatable interpretation is also the most psychological. The very name Stymphalian might be linked to a Greek word meaning to chatter or shriek incessantly. From this angle, the birds become a metaphor for those nagging, persistent problems in our own lives that seem small on their own. A single chattering bird is an annoyance. But 1,000 of them, a swirling cloud of deafening noise and sharp beaks, becomes an insurmountable crisis. They are the swarm of anxieties, the endless to-do lists, the multitude of small conflicts that, when taken individually, are manageable, but when they mass together, they can cloud our judgment and paralyze us with their sheer volume. Hercules' solution then becomes a brilliant allegory for tackling such overwhelming swarms. He did not try to fight each bird one by one, a futile effort that would have exhausted and defeated him. Instead, he used a single, clever, and unified strategy, the divine Crotolla, to address the entire swarm at once. He created a solution so powerful and focused that it reset the entire chaotic system, scattering the problem and allowing him to pick off the remaining pieces with precision. His victory teaches us that when faced with a chattering cloud of troubles, the answer is rarely to confront each tiny problem in isolation, but to find the one resonant idea, the single disruptive action that can break the entire cycle and restore peace. Athena's gift of the Crotolla was far more than a clever tool. It was a profound lesson in the nature of heroism. This sixth labor marks a pivotal evolution in Hercules' journey, a moment where raw power alone was no longer enough. Consider his very first labor against the Nemean lion. There, his challenge was direct and physical, a brutal test of might against an invincible hide. His solution was equally direct, using his own immense strength to strangle the beast. It was a victory of pure, unadulterated force. But the Stymphalian birds presented a different kind of enemy, one that could not be choked or clubbed into submission. They were a problem of scale, distance, and environment. Standing alone in that vast marsh, Hercules embodied the limits of physical strength. He could have thrown boulders into the sky until he collapsed from exhaustion and never made a dent in their numbers. His greatest asset had become useless. This is why his prayer to Athena was so significant. In that moment of desperation, he was not asking for more power, he was asking for a new way to think. He was learning that some walls cannot be punched down, they must be outsmarted. Athena, as the goddess of strategic wisdom, did not provide a shortcut. She provided a new lens through which to view the entire conflict. Her intervention shifted the battlefield from the physical realm to the realm of the mind. The real victory was not in the scattering of the birds, but in Hercules' willingness to set aside his pride and embrace a strategy that required intellect over instinct. This labor stands as a brilliant counterpoint to his earlier triumphs, revealing that a hero's true growth is not measured by the weight he can lift, but by the complexity of the problems he can solve. What good is the strength to strangle a lion if you cannot silence 1,000 chattering threats? Hercules was learning that the greatest strength of all is the wisdom to know when not to use your own. This labor forever redefined Hercules as a master archer. While his club symbolized raw, earth-shattering power, his bow represented precision, patience, and a terrifying kind of grace. The chaotic sky over Lake Stymphalia was the perfect proving ground for this skill. He was not aiming at a single, massive target like the Nemean lion. His challenge was to pick off individual, fast-moving birds from a swirling storm of thousands. Each arrow had to be a perfect calculation, accounting for the frantic flapping of metallic wings, the shifting winds, and the ever-changing positions within the flock. His legendary accuracy was not just a physical gift, it was a form of supreme focus, a mental discipline that allowed him to find calm and order within utter chaos. One by one, he brought down the monstrous birds, each shot a silent testament to a skill that was every bit as formidable as his strength. This event was a crucial demonstration that his heroism was a balanced combination of brute force and refined technique. The man who could strangle a lion with his bare hands was also the man who could thread an arrow through the eye of a hurricane. This mastery of the bow was not a one-time trick. It foreshadowed critical moments in his future. He would later join the band of heroes known as the Argonauts on their quest for the Golden Fleece, where his archery would prove invaluable against other mythical threats. In his final, agonizing moments, it would be a poisoned arrow, its tip dipped in the same Hydra blood used here, that would ultimately bring about his own mortal end and his subsequent ascension to godhood. The Stymphalian Birds cemented his reputation as a complete warrior, a hero who understood that every problem demands its own unique tool, and that sometimes the most powerful solution is a single, perfectly placed shot. The story of the Stymphalian Birds did not end with the cleansing of the swamp. It was immortalized in clay and paint, a favorite scene for the artisans of ancient Greece who captured the myth's strange drama on countless vases and amphorae. These artworks offer us a direct window into how the ancients themselves visualized this peculiar confrontation, prioritizing cleverness over brute force. A common motif shows Hercules not in the act of strangling a beast, but with his body taut and focused, his legendary bow drawn fully back. His expression is one of intense concentration, a testament to the precision required for this labor. Often lying discarded at his feet, we see the giant bronze clappers, the crotola. Their presence in the scene is crucial. They are not the weapon that killed the birds, but the tool that made the kill possible, a silent nod to the goddess Athena's strategic intervention. The sky above the hero is never empty. It is filled with the falling forms of the monstrous birds, tumbling head over wings in a shower of bronze. The artists took great care to depict their metallic nature, painting their feathers a stark, shining black to represent bronze, their beaks and talons sharp and lethal even in their death throes. Some vases show them pierced by arrows, while others simply show them falling, overwhelmed by the sonic assault. This artistic choice to include both the tool and the archer tells the whole story. It was not one solution, but two, working in perfect harmony, the noise that created the chaos and the arrow that exploited it. These pottery scenes are more than decoration, they are frozen narratives. They show us that the Greeks understood the core lesson of this labor, that true victory often lies in the brilliant idea that comes before the bow is even drawn. The myth of the unnatural swamp finds a strange echo in the very real landscape of Greece. Lake Stymphalia, nestled in the northeastern Peloponnese, is not a fiction. It is a living, breathing body of water that still exists today, a shallow and fluctuating lake in a limestone basin. Geologically, this area is a pulge, a large flat plain where water collects with no easy escape. The lake's level can change dramatically with the seasons, expanding in the winter rains and shrinking back in the summer heat, leaving behind vast, marshy wetlands. This constant cycle of flooding and drying creates a perfect environment for one thing: reeds. Dense, towering thickets of reeds and papyrus have always choked the lake's edges, a natural fortress for any creature seeking refuge. This persistent, waterlogged nature of the land suggests the ancient description of a treacherous marsh was not pure invention, but a poetic exaggeration of a genuine, challenging environment. Could this tangible, difficult landscape have been the seed from which a monstrous legend grew? Archaeologists and historians have long been fascinated by this intersection of myth and reality. The region around the lake shows evidence of ancient human activity, including the remains of a small temple dedicated to none other than Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt and the wild. This is a compelling clue. Why would a settlement build a shrine to a goddess associated with wild animals in such a seemingly inhospitable place? The answer may lie in a plea for protection. If the lake and its surroundings were indeed plagued by an overabundance of aggressive wildlife, particularly birds that destroyed crops and threatened livestock, whom better to appease than the divine mistress of the creatures? The local people would have sought her favor to control the very nature she commanded. Over generations, a practical problem, a nuisance of overpopulated and destructive waterfowl, could have been transformed through the lens of storytelling. A flock of pesky birds becomes a flock of man-eating monsters. Their startling, sudden flights through the reeds become the sound of clashing metal. The real environmental struggle for survival was elevated into an epic clash fit for a hero, giving a divine explanation for a very earthly hardship. The myth provided a reason for the suffering and a symbol of its heroic resolution, all rooted in the difficult, beautiful, and very real wetlands of Stymphalia. This terrifying motif of monstrous birds is not unique to Greek shores. Cultures across the ancient world looked to the skies and saw not just wonder, but winged predators of immense power. In the vast deserts and trading routes of Arabic folklore, tales were told of the roc, a bird so colossal its wings could blot out the sun. It was said to feed on elephants, carrying them away to its mountain nest with terrifying ease. While the Stymphalian birds were a swarm of metallic horror, the roc was a singular force of nature, a representation of the overwhelming, untamable power of the wilderness. Yet both share that core characteristic of viewing humanity as prey, transforming the sky from a source of light and life into a domain of existential threat. Meanwhile, in the rich tapestry of Persian mythology, we find the simurgh, a being of startling complexity. This magnificent creature was often depicted with a peacock's tail and a dog's head, its body sometimes made of brass. It possessed vast wisdom and was a benevolent protector, a purifier of the land and water. The simurgh shows us the other side of the coin. Here is a mythical bird not as an agent of punishment, but as a divine messenger and a symbol of healing, a creature that could bridge the earth and the heavens. What does this global fascination tell us? It reveals a universal human instinct to project our greatest fears and highest hopes onto the creatures of the air. Birds, with their ability to traverse the realms of earth and sky, have always been natural symbols for the divine. They can be the terrifying, inscrutable will of a god, descending as a plague of bronze like the servants of Ares. They can be the raw, untamed danger of the wild like the elephant-eating roc, or they can be the benevolent, healing force, the guide and protector like the simurgh. These stories are more than just monster tales. They are ancient attempts to explain the unexplainable forces that shape our world, from the plagues that ruin crops to the salvations that arrive on the wind. The Stymphalian birds fit perfectly into this ancient conversation, a chilling Greek contribution to a global chorus of mythical wings. This sixth labor marks a crucial pivot in the hero's grueling journey. His first 5 trials were largely against terrestrial monsters, fearsome yet bound to the earth. He strangled the Nemean lion on solid ground, fought the many-headed hydra in its swamp, and captured the Erymanthian boar across mountain slopes. These were direct, physical confrontations where his supreme strength could find purchase. But the Stymphalian birds introduced a new and terrifying dimension, an enemy that controlled the air. This was not merely another beast to wrestle, it was a strategic problem that demanded a different kind of heroism. By placing this labor sixth, the sequence forces Hercules to evolve. He can no longer rely solely on the power in his hands, he must now harness the power of his mind. The birds served as a brutal transition, a bridge from the earthly realm to a world of increasingly surreal and unnatural challenges. They were a test to see if the hero could adapt, if he could learn that some walls are not made of stone but of air. What good is the strength to hold up the sky if you cannot clear it of a single flock? This labor answered that question, proving his versatility and preparing him for the even greater impossibilities that lay ahead. The challenges that follow this turning point escalate dramatically in their strangeness and scope. He would next be sent to capture the fire-breathing Cretan bull, a creature of pure elemental fury, and then to seize the man-eating mares of Diomes, a task of sheer, visceral horror. After that, he would be tasked with acquiring the girdle of a warrior queen and the apples from the very garden of the Hesperides at the edge of the world. Each new labor pushed further beyond the bounds of a simple monster hunt, delving deeper into the divine and the mystical. The Stymphalian Birds were the gateway, the moment the labors truly ascended from heroic feats into the stuff of pure legend. They forced Hercules to look upward, to understand that his greatest trials would not always be the ones he could reach out and touch, but the ones that soared just beyond his grasp, taunting him from the heavens. These metallic monsters never truly fell from the sky. Their legend simply migrated, finding a new home in the glowing screens of modern pop culture. The archetype of the unnatural, weaponized bird proved far too compelling to be left in the ancient texts. In the campy, muscle-bound world of television shows like Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, the birds were a familiar foe, their bronze feathers and aggressive swarms translated into a weekly special effect. They became a staple enemy, a recognizable piece of the heroic checklist for a new audience. But it was in the interactive realm of video games that the Stymphalian Birds truly found their perfect modern habitat. Game designers recognized their inherent qualities as a perfect video game enemy, a creature that could attack from a distance, move in unpredictable swarms, and present a unique environmental challenge. In the brutal, mythic landscapes of the God of War series, they are often one of the many deadly obstacles Kratos must obliterate, their sharp projectiles and chaotic flight patterns testing the player's reflexes. The game turns their mythological terror into a tangible gameplay mechanic, forcing you to dodge their feathery volleys or use area of effect attacks to clear the sky, much like Hercules himself. This translation is a fascinating loop, taking an ancient story and giving the player direct agency within it. You are no longer just hearing about the hero's clever strategy, you are forced to devise one of your own to survive their digital onslaught. How do you solve the problem of 1,000 chattering threats when you are holding the controller? The myth provides the blueprint and the game provides the sandbox. This interactive legacy ensures the birds remain more than a forgotten footnote. They become a living, breathing part of our contemporary storytelling language. The most brilliant modern reinterpretation might be found in the critically acclaimed game Hades. Here, the Stymphalian Birds appear not as a central boss, but as common enemies in the fiery depths of asphodel. The game's genius lies in how it weaves their mythological essence directly into its mechanics and world building. The codex entry you unlock upon encountering them explicitly names them and recounts their myth, directly educating the player. Their design stays true to their origins as they fire volleys of sharp projectiles, forcing the player to constantly move and prioritize targets, recreating the chaotic pressure Hercules must have felt. Even their death animation is a clever nod, as they sometimes drop a healing item called a feather, a small but meaningful resource. In Hades, they are not just random monsters, they are a piece of a living, breathing mythology that the player interacts with and learns from through gameplay. This is how ancient stories evolve, not by being preserved under glass, but by being set loose in new worlds. They become part of the shared language of fantasy, their core concept, a swarm of deadly, projectile-firing flyers, so effective that it feels innate. When a game designer needs a flying enemy that can harass the player from a distance, the template of the Stymphalian Bird is already there, waiting in the collective imagination. Their journey from a poisoned Greek marsh to a procedurally generated underworld proves that a truly potent symbol can never be caged, continually finding new skies to haunt and new heroes to test. Perhaps the most enduring power of this ancient story is how it speaks directly to our modern inner world. The swamp is no longer just a physical place, but a state of mind, a psychological landscape we can all recognize. The Stymphalian Birds, in this light, transform from mythical monsters into something far more familiar, the relentless, swarming thoughts of anxiety and fear. Think of their incessant, metallic chattering as the constant background noise of worry, the intrusive thoughts that peck at our peace of mind. Their toxic dung, which poison the land, mirrors how unchecked anxiety can blight our mental landscape, making it impossible for anything positive to grow. And their ability to launch feathers from a distance perfectly captures how our fears can attack us from anywhere, striking without warning and leaving us feeling helpless and exposed. This interpretation asks a deeply personal question. How often do you feel besieged by your own thoughts, by a swirling cloud of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios that you cannot seem to quiet? Hercules, then, becomes more than a demigod. He becomes a symbol of our own struggle to regain control. His initial paralysis at the edge of the marsh is a feeling we all know, that moment of being completely overwhelmed, where the problem seems so vast and complex that no direct action could possibly solve it. You cannot simply punch your anxiety into submission any more than he could punch the sky. His prayer for wisdom is the crucial first step, the moment we admit we need a new strategy, that our usual ways of coping are no longer working. The divine crotala, the tool of overwhelming noise, is a brilliant metaphor for a disruptive cognitive technique. Sometimes, to break a cycle of obsessive, negative thinking, you cannot engage with each individual thought. That is like trying to fight each bird one by one, a battle you will inevitably lose to exhaustion. Instead, you need a single, powerful intervention to reset your entire mental state. This could be a mindfulness exercise that grounds you in the present moment, a vigorous physical activity that burns off nervous energy, or even consciously introducing a positive, absorbing distraction. The loud noise scatters the chaotic flock, creating the mental space you need to breathe and think clearly, but the labor does not end with the noise. Hercules then picks up his bow. This is the second, equally vital phase, the systematic, targeted work. Once the initial, overwhelming swarm of anxiety has been disrupted, you can address the individual, lingering thoughts with precision. This is the core of many therapeutic practices where you learn to identify a specific negative belief, examine its validity, and challenge it with logic and evidence. You are not fighting the entire cloud of fear at once. You are taking aim at one distorted thought at a time, proving to yourself that it does not have the power you fear it does. His victory teaches us that managing mental distress is a two-part process. First, a disruptive strategy to break the cycle of panic, and second, a patient, focused effort to address the root causes one by one. The story assures us that the swarm can be scattered, the mind can be cleared, and that peace, like the quiet that returned to Arcadia, is always worth fighting for. Yet the divine crotala themselves hold a story beyond that single, thunderous day. What became of these extraordinary noisemakers after the last bird fled the sky? We often picture Hercules carrying his club and bow, but we rarely wonder about the tool that made his victory possible. In the real world of ancient Greece, crotala were not mythical weapons. They were a common part of life, used in vibrant religious rituals and ecstatic dances dedicated to gods like Dionysus and Cybele. These were instruments of celebration and trance, their rhythmic clattering meant to drive away evil spirits and raise energy to connect the dancer to a higher state. A simple farmer might have used a smaller pear made of wood or shell during a harvest festival. This everyday reality makes Athena's gift all the more brilliant. She did not hand Hercules a lightning bolt. She took a familiar object of joy and community, and by scaling it up to a divine proportion, transformed it into an instrument of strategic warfare. It was a solution built from the fabric of Greek culture itself. So where did Hercules' specific pear end up? The myths are silent, leaving a tantalizing mystery. Perhaps he returned them to Athena in a gesture of gratitude, and they were placed back in the armory of the gods, waiting for another hero in need of a clever solution. Or maybe they were lost, sinking into the very swamp they helped to cleanse, their bronze discs slowly consumed by the peat. The most poetic possibility is that they were simply set aside, their purpose fulfilled. Their power was not in their material worth, but in the single, perfect idea they represented. They remind us that the greatest tools are not always the ones that strike the final blow, but the ones that create the opportunity for victory to even be possible. Hercules had turned an impossible situation into a legendary victory, not with a show of brute force, but through a symphony of intellect and action. The story of the Stymphalian Birds stands as a masterclass in problem-solving, a perfect fusion of divine wisdom, clever strategy, and peerless skill. He began with nothing but a desperate prayer, accepting that his own strength was useless. Athena's gift of the crotola was the spark of genius, the disruptive idea that shattered the birds' overwhelming advantage. But the plan did not end with the noise. His precise archery, picking targets from the chaotic sky, was the flawless execution that secured the win. This labor proves that true power lies in knowing which tool to use and when, blending a brilliant mind with a steady hand. This is the timeless appeal of the Hercules myths. They are not simply tales of a strongman performing fantastic feats. They are deeply human stories about resilience in the face of crushing punishment, about the ingenuity that flourishes when all seems lost. They remind us that our greatest challenges often demand more than muscle. They require us to think differently, to adapt, and to find a new way forward when the old paths are blocked. Each labor is a lesson in conquering the seemingly insurmountable, a testament to the enduring human spirit. So we turn the question to you. With 12 incredible trials to choose from, which of Hercules' labors captures your imagination the most? Was it cleansing the Augean stables in a single day, or perhaps capturing the golden-horned Cyrenian hind? Share your favorite in the comments below.